Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 6 of our first week of 3D modeling. My name is David, and today we're going to talk about expanding your tool sets inside the Edit Poly menu to create a couple of different types of objects. I'll also be giving you an assignment at the end in the part 7 video. But for part 6, we're going to talk more about the tools that we're going to learn this week. So what I'd like to get started with is to reset your entire 3D Studio Max scene back to normal. I'm going to reset mine right now. I'm not going to save my previous work and completely reset until you have your scene like this. Now, the first step we're going to do is I'm going to make something that I'm going to call a sci-fi battery. So when you think about a sci-fi battery, I'm just going to make a box to start with. You can also choose a cylinder if you'd like to make a sci-fi battery or other types of objects, but I'm just going to start with something like this. And this is just an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my modify menu, and I'm going to make sure my length, width, height segment are exactly the way I want them, and I'm going to make sure I have enough segments to work with. So I can push F3 on my keyboard. I see the wireframe is really, really simple on this, and we're going to keep it relatively low poly. So I don't mind if it's like this. I'm going to show you some cool tools to really expand upon a model. No matter how simple it is, we can make something really complex, not only with adding this type of detail, but using some special tool sets to really go crazy. So if you add an edit poly modifier, chances are the first thing you're going to notice is, especially when you're playing around with vertex and edges and polygons, you don't have a lot to work with, right? You got like 8 vertexes to work with, a whole bunch of edges, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 edges, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygons to work with. How is this supposed to be a sci-fi battery, right? And that can be pretty confusing to people, especially when you're first introduced to 3D Studio Max. Knowing how to create like different parts of objects, like or create an object out of one thing, it's going to become very, very difficult unless you use a lot of standard primitives, put them together, and that might go really, really wrong, right? So this way, I'm going to teach you how to use the Edit Poly menu to your advantage to create new polygons on your model that you can customize and control much easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to hidden line mode. I'm going to make it a little bit easier to see this. I'm going to push G to get rid of my grid. So what we have is just a solid box with some lines around it. And you can plan out your battery any way you want. I'm just doing a little freeform modeling right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Edit Poly menu, and I'm going to teach you guys about the Polygon menu. This is the most important menu, I think, inside 3D Studio Max in the Edit Poly modifier that will really enhance your modeling skills because it allows us to create new polygons on our model ourselves and not rely on 3D Studio Max to auto-generate stuff for us. So in Edit Poly Polygon mode, if you scroll down your parameter list, you're going to see you have Edit Poly mode, you have Selection, you have Soft Selection. I'm just going to minimize Soft Selection. But our important menu that we have is called Edit Polygons. And that's right here, Edit Polygons. And what this menu allows us to do is it allows us to create new polygons in our model by using different tools. So the first tool I want to teach you guys is what's called the Inset tool. We're in polygon mode right now, and if we click on a polygon, we can select it. We can hold Control to select more polygons. We can hold Alt and left click to select less polygons. I'm just going to select the top face of my polygon here, like this, and I'm going to go to my Inset tool, but not click on Inset. Click on the little option box. Normally you want to play around with the settings inside 3D Studio Max, so this allows us to play around with the settings. Click on this, and you're going to notice that it's pretty much set to 00 default, and it also has an inset type, which is now set to group for us, and we can click it and set it by polygon or by group. I'm just going to leave it on by group right now, and I'm going to increase this number. So what inset does, if you can notice on your model as well, or whatever you're playing around with, is it creates a new polygon inside your bigger polygon that you have selected. It shrinks the polygon inside the polygon you currently have selected. You'll notice at 0, there is no new polygon being created, but if I keep the number going down, it creates a new polygon inside that shape. Now, what you're going to notice, especially if you're on by group mode, hold Control and select another polygon. It actually will make an inset over every polygon you have selected, just like that. So if I select these two polygons and it's on group mode, it will make an inset based upon all the polygons I have selected. However, I can change that. Instead of by group, I'm going to left click on the little icon here, and it's going to switch to by polygon. And you're going to see now that I have these two polygons being created for me. If I click on this side, I got 3. If I click here and here and here, now everything has a new polygon created in the middle for me. I can click apply and continue, or just click OK. And you can inset it again and again and again as much as you want. So we see we now have another inset right here. And we can keep doing that over and over again as much as you want, or cancel them back up. So not only did I just take a model that only had, you know, 6 polygons on it, now I have much more polygons to play with. And also it's good for the other tools I have access to play around with. Because right now we have hidden line on. And right now I'm looking at my polygons and I'm like, okay, maybe maybe I wanted like a 9-volt battery. Maybe I want some detail on this end, that this is the end that needs to plug into something. Well, now I'm going to use another tool. So we use the inset tool to get new polygons inside polygons that we had selected, either by group or by the specific polygons. But now I want to push out a polygon. I want to do something called extrude a polygon. And this will be a little simpler because with this mode, I can click on the extrude button right here and edit polygons, and it goes blue, which means it's active. If I left click on a polygon and select it, you're going to notice that on my selection, if my mouse hovers above it, I have a cube that's pretty much extending outwards towards your screen. That means if you left click and drag on your selection, it's going to extrude that. So if I just click this one polygon that I want to extrude, hover my mouse above it, then left click and drag, it extrudes out an entire new shape from my 3D model. Just like that. And you can extrude as many times as you want. Extrude mode is always active until you right click or push Q on your keyboard. I'm just going to undo a couple steps here. I'm pretty content with the shape I have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create an inset again. And not only can I extrude outwards like this, I can extrude inwards, right? So if we look at my shape, and I'm going to turn off hidden line mode and go back into default shading here, I got this cool shape of this battery slot that I can push into something if I want. So from a box, I was able to create this little amount of detail. Now it's not much detail yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an extrude tool on the top too and just push in just a little bit. And maybe I'm going to use the inset here. And just make some more detail. I'm just using the scale tool and inset. I'm going to change my color just a little bit, maybe, and make it easier for you guys to see here. There you go. And I'm going to extrude this a little bit outwards. And what I'm doing is I'm just using the extrude and inset tools to get more detail. So I can extrude the side if I want. So now I have a really flat bottom. I have sides that protrude. I have a top part here, and I have a plug-in port pretty much for my model here. Now, not only is there inset and extrude, we're not going to use the outline tool right now. What we're going to switch to is the bevel tool. Now, the bevel tool works exactly like the extrude tool does. If I left click and drag on a polygon or select multiple polygons and left click and drag, you'll notice the icon isn't an extending cube. However, it is now just like it looks like a little polygon with 2 arrows beside it. That's because it's a bevel. And what a bevel does is if you left click and drag, it extrudes. But if you let go of your left click, you're not done on bevel mode yet. If you move your mouse up and down, it actually shrinks or expands that polygon. And then if you left click, now you're done. And you can push QWER to exit bevel mode or right click. And then now I can play around and have that polygon in the shape I want. Don't forget that not only do you have this to work on, like you don't need to work always in one single model. We can always make another model. Let's say I want to make a sphere and move that sphere here. I can go to my modify panel, change the amount of segments my sphere has. Let's say it's something more like this. And I'm going to change the hemisphere option to create half a sphere instead of a full sphere. And I think this is pretty good. I might add a few more segments like that. Alternate gray as well. And I'm going to push F4 on my keyboard to turn off edge faces just to see how it looks in the end. I'm going to scale it down. But now we get this little sphere object, right? And don't forget that we can always attach objects to other objects as well. So I can actually attach the sphere to my main model, and now it's actually a part of one single object that we can see in our object and scene layer manager, and I can access it just by clicking element. And I can change where it's located. And remember that we held shift and moved an entire object to copy it? Well, you can do the same thing inside a 3D model. I have an element here that I hold shift, and using the move tool, I can copy it to a new part of my mesh. And instead of saying just clone or copy, it says clone part of mesh. You can clone it to an entirely new object. So this will become a separate object completely, or a new element, which is exactly what we have in element selection mode, which I'll do. And then I can just copy this over and over again. Clone the element. Clone the element. And now we have a very odd looking sci-fi-ish battery compartment that we can alter and change as we see fit. So don't play around with the extrude tools and everything in polygon mode. Extrude, bevel, inset. Those are all really important tools. But now I want to do something a little bit different. We're going to learn about a new tool. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to grab both sides of this polygon. I'm going to create an inset. And now you can see on my sides, I have these two polygons here and here selected. Now we're going to delete this polygons. To delete polygons, you just have to highlight that polygon and click delete. And now you're going to see that there's a hole in our 3D model. To fix holes in 3D models, we use a cap or a bridge tool. Now we're not going to find that in Polygon right now. We do have our bridge tool, but it's not perfectly working. We need to go to border mode for this. So we deleted polygons, which means we have an open hole in our 3D model. Nothing is connected to these edges, which means it's a hole in our model. If I click on this hole, you're going to see that border mode actually works now. And if I click on this border, it highlights the entire empty border of my 3D model. And I have tools that are available in edit borders in the parameters down here that we can use. Now the one tool I can use with only one border selected is called cap. And it tries to cap or tries and fills in polygons for what it thinks is viable on our 3D model. So here it's a really simple cap. It just needs to make one polygon and it will seal this off completely. If I go to edit borders and I click cap, you can see it actually sealed off our 3D model here. And if I click here, caps off, and I instantly fixed my 3D model with a hole. So if you ever delete a polygon by accident, don't forget about using the borders cap tool. It's really handy. Now, what I really want to show you guys, and what I think is super impressive about border mode, is being able to create holes in something and creating polygons all around it very fast and very easy to create holes that make sense inside a 3D model. How we do that is picture a window ledge and picture that we need to make a border inside that window so we can put the glass in something. We need to grab one border. We need to grab the other border. And we're going to fill in the polygons all around this border. And to do that, we use the bridge tool. Now don't just click bridge settings. Bridge settings will give you a preview exactly how it's going to create polygons. But look, it already filled in all the polygons inside our object here. So if we needed to put like another type of object inside our battery, a liquid or anything inside our scene, this is an easy way to do that. We also have parameters. We can actually create more segments inside that we can play around with. We can change the bias. We can even give it a twist. So if I add more segments, we can actually add a cool effect here with the twist. It makes it look very unique. And we can lower the amount of segments or lower the twist since I don't really need that here. We have taper, we have smooth. We can have taper here to make it look like it's kind of squishing together in the middle. Give it a nice shape. And then I click check mark when I'm done or apply and continue and I'll be absolutely fine there. So now we got a cool looking battery that's looking pretty mighty, I might say. Very unique and very sci-fi-ish. So basically, using the polygon mode to use an extrude, the inset, the bevel are really important, and then switching to border mode to select polygons that you've deleted and create borders by capping them, which means it fills in the polygons, or by bridging them, which as we can tell by selecting two different borders and bridging them together, we can fill in the hole with whatever type of 3D objects we want, like creating walls pretty much around our 3D model. It's really handy to create unique shapes that you could never ever get inside a basic object inside 3D Studio Max. Also, not forgetting to attach and detach objects together to create one solid object. Now, you don't have to attach objects together all the time. We can leave them as separate objects. It's just that normally, if something is one single object inside 3D Studio Max, you probably want it to use one texture map, unless it has to have a very detailed or very different texture map completely. In which case, we can leave these models detached as long as they're not animated, and that will be fine just the way it is. So, the next step about what we want to learn is we want to learn to weld vertexes. Welding vertexes is important if you need to like put something together a little bit better. So for instance, let's say I want to create a cylinder, such as this. Simple cylinder. I'm going to add a cap segment. I'm going to go to my modify panel. I'm going to add edit poly here. I'm going to change the color so it's a little bit easier to look at. Yeah, like a dark color like this. Okay. So with it selected, I'm not going to go into polygon mode. We've played around enough in that. We know that border mode has cap and bridge, which are really handy tools. We're going to go to vertex mode. So if you notice that you have vertexes on your mesh that you can weld together to create less polygons, then go for it. Because the less polygons you have on your 3D model, the easier it is to 3D render. And if the shape doesn't need it, then you can always weld it together. To easily do that, you grab two vertexes, and I've showed you this one time before, but I really want to make sure you remember this one as well, because it can be really important, is to go to vertex mode, go down to edit vertices, and go to weld settings. Don't just click on weld, go to weld settings. Remember that we can change the number up and down until it shows you a preview of how it's going to weld. And then you can click OK or apply and continue. That's really important when it comes to vertex mode. So just try and keep a memory of that one. The next one I want to teach you guys about is what's called edge extrusion. Now this is a really handy tool if you're going to build something polygon by polygon. And I'll show you an example of why you would use that. I have a plane here I've created. A plane is a single-sided polygon. One side is colored, one side goes black, which means this side is going to render in a camera and this side is not. Now some people, eventually, you'll master it as well, will step away from box modeling and go into what's called edge modeling or polygon extrusion, edge extrusion modeling. And to do this, basically I would create a plane like this. And I would only give it one segment and one segment, which creates one solid polygon. And then to start creating a 3D object, I add edit poly. And instead of using the complicated polygon tools where we would cut and move and change things and extrude and inset, we're just going to go to edge mode. And we're going to grab an edge like this. I'm just going to move it down a little bit so you get a better view of this. So I have one edge selected. I can move it up and down, left, right, any way I see free. But now I'm going to do what's called an edge extrusion. So like we extruded using the polygon tools, we just clicked extrude and left clicked on one of the polygons and extruded it. On this one, it's simply by holding the shift key and using the move tool, we're able to create a new polygon, just like that. So if I wanted to create a guard for a sword, I would hold shift and extrude, making sure that the colored faces of the polygon are outwards, rendering towards my camera, and anything black is hidden away from the camera. So this would be almost the inside of my 3D model, and this is the outside. So now I'm going to extrude one more time to seal up my 3D model. I'm going to extrude these two edges. I'm going to adjust the vertices like this and like that. I'm going to do the same thing for this side here. Now, instead of having to do the same thing for this side right here, which might be a bit annoying, what I can do is I can actually grab these polygons, these two polygons right here in polygon mode. So in extrude mode, in edge mode, to extrude an edge, you hold shift and use the move tool. If you're in polygon mode and select polygons and hold shift, they actually copy the polygons over. So shift and moving on polygon mode will copy polygons over. And I can just clone them to a different element. So you're going to notice a problem with the polygons now that we have copied over. If I put them in place where I want them, they're black on the outside, which means they're not going to render to the camera. If we put them in a video game or we're going to render out an image or a movie, these would not show to the camera. The purple ones will, but anything black, it's going to be completely see-through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to polygon mode, in our edit poly menu, go to polygon mode, grab these two polygons, and I'm going to scroll down my menu until I'm in the edit polygons menu, and that's where we had extrude bevel inset. There's actually a tool called flip. Now that will flip the polygon so that the rendering side and the non-rendering side flip over. So if I click flip, you're going to notice now the color side is visible, and now it will render towards the camera. The last step we have when moving edges around, moving polygons around, is to make sure that everything is welded. Normally I like to select every vertex in the entire scene, go to weld mode settings, and make sure by rotating around that it grabbed every vertex that could be welded and has welded them shut. And normally you can tell just by the number. Before I had 21 vertexes, and after all the welding is done, I have 12 vertexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's 6 on both sides. That's absolutely perfect. I click the check button and we're good to go. We now have this part of my model, and that didn't use any shape in 3D Studio Max except the basic plane, which is just a single polygon. I managed to create this shape. So it's really important that you create this type of shape. And let's say this is the start of a guard of a sword. So I'm just going to squish it, modify it. Don't forget to change the pivot point of our model, which is right over here now. We need to go to our third panel here, our hierarchy, and the adjust pivot menu. We click effect pivot only. We can center it to our object or alter the location of it wherever we want. So let's say I'm going to make it right on the edge here. And then I'm going to use tools. I'm going to use mirror. And I'm going to copy it on the y-axis for this one. And I'm going to make it a reference. I'm going to position it because my pivot was a bit offset there. And now anything I do to one side of this polygon, one side of this mesh will occur to the other side. So now I'm getting a cool guard to my sword here, like that. So with some simple modifying and changing, you're able to create some cool objects just by modifying just a plane, or you can use a box and extrude. You can do anything you want in a number of different ways. Now, a quick hint: if you need two different mirrored objects to line up perfectly, what you want to do is normally go to the top view and just look at how the vertexes are lining up. I notice a bit of a gap here, and I notice that my vertexes aren't perfectly flat. What I like to do in my top view is I like to select every polygon or every vertice in the middle of my model. So the point where both models are supposed to connect, so the edge of the model here. And then I go to my scale tool and I flatten it on the y-axis or the x-axis, depending on how your model looks. But what it does is it flattens all the vertexes out against themselves. And then if we look at it from a different view, like perspective, you'll notice the vertexes are all pretty flat now. And although there is a bit of moving and adjusting to do here, they line up very well. So before I attach these objects and weld them together, they look like a pretty good object. And now I have a good sword guard. Now I'm happy to continue with the rest of my model and create a handle with a cylinder shape, which I will do probably in the front view here. And then go back to perspective mode. I'll rotate my object. So what you're going to notice, and this is the last thing I'll talk about in this tutorial, is I'm trying to rotate my object, but it's telling me, okay, you're rotating 86.61 degrees, 53.54. I can't seem to get a perfect 90-degree angle. Well, there's two things we can do. The first thing we can do is if we want to rotate an object, we can play around with the arrows down here until we get the exact rotation we want in the X, Y, Z down at the very bottom here. Because we're in rotation mode, that's exactly what the X, Y, and Z axis will tell us. If I type in 90, look what happens. If I type in minus 90, there we go, I got a perfect angle. But there's another way you can do that that's less, mathematical typing in something. We can actually adjust it by using one of these tools, which are called the magnet tools. And these magnet tools help you adjust rotations and movements of objects because they snap to different positions inside 3D Studio Max. Normally I don't use many of these tools, but the one tool I do like using the most is what's called the angle snap tool, which is the second tool here. If we click it, it turns active. And if we start rotating an object, it rotates by 5 degrees. Always 5 degrees. It doesn't affect the move tool, doesn't affect the scale tool, just the rotation tool. So it's pretty handy to have on, I think, because it just makes sense that I'm able to rotate by 5 degrees, because normally I'm not rotating something too specific. So I'm creating a sword handle here, and I'm using just different objects to sort of create a basic sword shape. I'm creating the nub for the sword here, just by using the scale tool. And I'm going to try and line it up in the top view. I want to make sure that everything lines up to the middle of the object. And I know that this is the middle polygon, so I start moving things along the black line on the grid, like so. So that if I go on my perspective view, everything's pretty lined up great. I'm just going to move this nub a bit upwards, like that. Great. And I can keep modeling my sword. I can create a box. I can move it right into the position I want. So don't forget to use your extrude, your bevels, your insets, that kind of stuff to create the shape that you want. So for instance, with a sword blade, I always get the question a lot, how do I make a sword blade look good? Every time I make a sword blade, it does not look good. I'm going to add a couple of segments to our sword blade. 2, 2, 2. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to add an edit poly modifier. And I'm going to start adjusting my sword to where I think it looks good. So I'm going to grab the sword blade front. I'm going to go to my, let's say, I got to go to my left view here. And I bring out the sword blade on the sides. So I think it looks pretty good from there. But now what happens? The sides of the blade look okay. But I need to create some new polygons to make sure this looks pretty sharp. Now, there's a problem I have with this model, is that the top of the blade, the bottom of the blade, they don't look that great. The smoothing is wrong. So what I want to do, because the top and bottom of the blade are going to look identical, I'm going to go to my front view or my left view here. And I'm going to delete the bottom polygons. All the bottom of these polygons. Because just like we have the mirror tool for mirroring left and right, we can mirror up and down as well. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go Tools Mirror. And I'm going to mirror on the y-axis up and down. And I'm going to make a reference out of it. Okay. I'm going to move it in position. So that what I have in the end is the top and the bottom of the blade that are completely mirrored. So anything I do to the top part of the blade will occur to the bottom part of the blade. So now I'm going to introduce you to two last tools for this tutorial session called Polygon Cut and Slice Plane. Polygon Cut is an important tool because what it allows us to do, and I'll change the color of this model since I know the yellow is probably not that great. I'll change it to dark blue. Polygon Cut allows us to cut new polygon shapes into it. So for instance, I pulled out the vertex on this front polygon here to give it a nice pointy shape. But unfortunately, that's not how the edge loop seems to be working here. We need to make sure that this is also a triangle so it smooths into the rest of our model. Right now you can see my polygon is kind of a little bit broken here. Not only because the smoothing group is wrong, but because it's not flowing as well. The polygon here, remember a polygon is made of two triangles. One triangle is technically only taking up this much space, and the other triangle is taking up this much space, which is why you're getting a weird distortion. I'm going to go to polygon mode, and I'm going to scroll down my menu. So not in Edit Polygons, but in Edit Geometry. There is actually a Cut tool here. If we click Cut, Cut mode is now active. And what you're going to notice is when I hold my mouse above a part of the model, above a polygon, it turns into a square with a penknife tool. If I hold it above an edge, it looks like a line with a penknife tool. If I left click, what happens is, if I move my mouse around after I left click, it creates a nice little line that's telling me, okay, you're going to cut from this point to the next point you click. And I'm going to cut right here to this edge, right here, which looks good. And then it's still active. Cut mode is always active until you right click. I'm going to go to this point here and right click. So what you've noticed is the error that was happening here where the triangle was, the distortion in the triangle is now gone, and I've created new triangle shapes here, which is fine to have in a 3D model. Don't worry about triangles so much. Most objects have triangles in them. Just always try and have a lot more polygons, squares, than triangles. If you can avoid triangles, great, but if they have to be there, they just have to be there. So right now we have our current shape, and it looks a lot better with these two polygons in here, and it automatically happened on the other side of my model too. This means if I want to, I can actually use the extrude tool and start playing around too and get a nice shape out of that. But what I really like to do is try and change the smoothing groups to this, because you could see what's happening with my model is it looks good here. There's the blade part. Sorry, I'm on my cut mode still. I have this blade part here, which is smooth on its own. This one's smooth on its own, and this is all smooth on its own up here. But then these two are not following the middle portion of the blade. It's all smooth here really weirdly. Well, that's where we have to change the smoothing groups of our model. Now, smoothing groups of the model are how 3D Studio Max defines how an object smooths on itself. Remember that if you have like a cell phone and the back is smooth, but the front is really coarse and really strong edge, is because one part of your phone is smooth and the other is not smooth. And that's the same way 3D Studio Max recognizes things as well. So right now you're telling 3D Studio Max that this part of the model needs a different smoothing group than the other, right? We want this to be one smooth on its own and everything else is completely different. So I'm going to scroll down in my edit polygon menu. I'm going to scroll all the way down and you're going to see polygon smoothing groups. You'll notice as we have this portion selected of our 3D model that we have some numbers grayed out, which means whatever I have selected is using multiple numbers. Now, what I normally like to do when I'm creating a 3D model is I normally like grabbing the entire model, like so, every single polygon, the entire model. And remember, we only have half a sword selected. And then I like to clear all. You can see my smoothing groups are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 smoothing groups are active on this 3D model. But I'm going to clear all. And now no smoothing groups are active. So my sword has really harsh edges all around. But maybe I want to smooth it out just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab what I think is one smoothing group. This edge right here, I think should be smoothed together. And this edge right here should be smoothed together. All I'm doing is assigning different numbers to different smoothing groups. So this one gets number 1. And you can see with those polygons selected, 1 is blue, which means it's active. The only reason those numbers turn gray is simply because there's 2 smoothing groups active. By turning gray and not showing a number at all, it means that more than one smoothing group is active in your selection. By turning just blue and still showing the number, it means your selection is only active on this number, which makes it a little bit easier for you to know what's smooth and what's not. So I'm going to assign this number 2. I'm going to assign this polygon number 3, this polygon over here, number 4, and all these middle polygons will be assigned number 5. You can see I have a much, much better shape to my sword now. It looks cleaner, it feels sharp on all the edges that it's supposed to be sharp, and it looks good with the lighting and all the different angles it's supposed to be. So smoothing groups are really important when it comes to creating an object like this. Learning which parts to smooth, which parts not to smooth is going to become really key, and it's very different for every model. The only thing I can suggest to learn and to keep this in your mind is wherever a model has to be smooth, there should be a good smoothing group. If it doesn't have to be smooth, then you don't have to give it a smoothing group. But it's normally nice, even if it's a single polygon like this one here, to give it a smoothing group. We'll make sure that it looks good in lighting. Even if it's not attached to another smoothing group, it'll still look pretty darn good. And because your smoothing groups are organized already, we can add some more detail here. So let's say I want to get crazy and ornate. Don't forget about all the other tools I taught you, including extrude, bevel, inset. Watch, I'm going to create an inset for this sword. Like this. And now I have this inset polygons here. I could delete it and make a really cool sword. And then I can bridge the sword to have a nice hole in it. Or I can just simply extrude inward. And I get a nice edge inside my sword. And I can play around with the vertexes until it matches what I want. I can then use a bevel tool. Why not? I'll extract it back outwards and bevel it slightly. Look how cool that sword is looking now, right? So what I'd like you guys to do, following this tutorial and being able to alter and change the shapes of objects, is to just basically make your own sword. Make it as cool as you want. And not only make a sword, make a shield along with it. Using the tools, extrude, bevel, inset, that's in polygon mode alone. Using the cut tool. using border to fill in holes in your objects, using vertex to weld, using edge extrusion techniques, exactly how I made the handle of the sword. If you need to learn edge extrusion, please go back to that part of this video and just extrude and move around the sword, and that'll be perfectly fine as well. For this, I only use a cylinder, but don't forget, even for this end nub right here, I can add a lot more detail to this. I just made it a cylinder, but if I add an edit poly modifier, edit poly modifier right here, and I go to polygon mode, and I'm going to go to wireframe mode here. I'm going to grab this entire circle of polygons right here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, use the scale tool, and I'm going to extrude that inwards just a little bit. I'm going to bevel it back outwards. I can do an inset. Let's inset this a little bit like this. Extrude again. Now look how cool that looks. Like already, just by doing just a couple more minutes of work, it looks great. Now you're going to notice something here, and it's good that we did this, because all around this 3D model right here, they're all harsh polygons. None of it is smooth together. This is exactly where you would use something like smoothing groups. So I would grab all these polygons here. There's so many of them that they should look smooth. And I will go down to my list, and I can see that they're not attached to any smoothing group. I will just assign it a number. And for this instance, I'm just going to say number 11. The numbers don't really matter too much. They're just for you to remember when you're playing around in your model, because you can always go select by smoothing group afterwards and select the smoothing group. I'm going to give this number 11. What you're going to notice, look how smooth that looks now. Much smoother. And we're going to do the same for the inside here as well, and the outside of there as well. And it's just adding this little finesse and taking your time to make sure a model looks smooth in all the right places. That's really going to bring out the detail in everything you work on. So what I'd like you to do is create a sword, create a shield. If you don't want to create a shield, that's fine. You can create a sword and an axe, a spear, some really cool weaponry. And if you want to expand on that, if you feel like you're modeling really, really fast and you can do a whole bunch more, then by all means, I suggest you to create a whole armory or maybe a weapon rack to accompany it. Don't forget that if you're able to do things fast, it should mean that you're able to actually create a lot more details. And now look, see, just by taking an extra few minutes, create the sword nub. I have a cool blade. I can create a cool sword handle. Start changing the sword handle. Do a whole bunch of things to it. And I'm going to be expanding upon this in the next tutorial as well. So stay tuned to the next lesson. Try and create a sword and shield for now using this method: sword, shield, axe, spear, scythe, any type of creative weapon you want. Be sure to add lots of detail by using the edit poly tools and all the little tools such as extrude, bevel, inset, cut, border, bridge, and cap. They're going to be really important the entire way, not only modeling sci-fi or inorganic objects, but when we model armor for your characters, that's going to be really important to remember these tools. So feel free to go over this tutorial one more time to make sure you get it all right. In the next tutorial, I'll be showing you some armor examples and maybe a couple of sci-fi examples. Stay tuned and stay classy.